You may or may not have heard of the word egregore. It's an interesting sounding word, and it's got a lot of history to it, and it's been dated differently and dated to certain people that were first heard coining it, and this isn't going to be a video giving you all of that information. You can Google that or Perplexity it, or use any search engine you like, or go to a library. But what interests me particularly about the word is that when I first heard it, which is probably 10 or 15 years ago, and the internet was around, you could hardly find any reference to it. When you did, there were just a few websites that referred to it, and those websites were definitely based in esoterica or even the occult. But if you have a look at the word egregore now, have a look on YouTube, have a look on search engines, there are pages and pages of references to egregores, and they've even made their way into the world of gaming, for example. But it does interest me, fascinates me actually, that the younger generation, Generation Z, the millennials, and even Generation A, the current emerging generation, are referring to it a hell of a lot. And you find a huge age range in reference to it too. You find very young people in there, sort of 18-year-olds, referring to egregores, and you find the sort of more ancient souls of my age referring to it as well, in quite a lot of depth. And there's a danger here that, a bit like gossip and the grapevine, is that people start quoting each other and the whole concept degrades. And I think that is actually what's going on right now. So let's get into egregore. It's often quoted as a collective thought form that creates a demon. So anybody here that's not into esoterica is going to probably switch this off now. But I would say it's also referred to a lot purely in metaphorical terms. And just as you might use the word team or community, the word egregore can sit just metaphorically as quite a useful concept to look at. It's particularly about groups of people, and it starts to generate its own existence as a kind of form or being that has an impact on our behaviour, our culture, our physical world, as if it's a demon that is invisible and that somehow manifests itself and impacts us in positive or negative ways. So quite often the literature you'll find refers to egregores as negative things, as demons, but you'll also find egregores in a positive sense too. And I first came across the word egregore when referring to the Knights Templar and the Crusades, and the 2 or 3 or weeks or longer days of abstinence and meditation that the soldiers, the fighters, the army that was going out to fight the Turk over in Jerusalem and nearby, and that they were in smaller numbers than their enemy, but would spend a long time in meditation and contemplation of a thought form. And the thought form was sometimes a woman in white, the classic Lady of the Lake type character, the Blessed Virgin, or a cup, the Holy Grail. And the image of it as kind of shimmering and powerful led to, when the soldiers were hopelessly outnumbered, there are stories of this thought form appearing, you might say in the form of a vision, a hallucination that lent strength to the army. And there are stories of them kind of overcoming far greater numbers than they had through, you might say, the inspiration or the strength lent to them, given to them by the appearance of this inspiring form. And some write about it as if it actually inhabited them and gave them physical strength. In others, it's a kind of inspiration. So it's the notion that a form is created that actually has a telling impact on the physical world. And you might argue it's just a psychological, motivational impact, or something more scary, something more esoteric, something more spiritual is going on. So just stay with me, because I think this works whether you've got spiritual beliefs or whether actually you're quite at the other end of the extreme. But you do accept that metaphors like team and other images can motivate, classically at the moment, like the flag, for positive and negative reasons. Positive in terms of it being inspirational, negative in terms of it creating a sort of elitism that separates you off in classic nationalistic way. So if I am building up an image of somebody that could be quite a dark, negative image of someone, a friend, being unreliable and untrustworthy, so that when I meet them, that's kind of what I see, that's not an egregore. that is similar to an egregore, but it doesn't have a lasting impact. It probably comes into being when I'm with that person and when I think of that person, but it's more in my psychology. It affects my behavior because in a way that's the attitude, the bias, the mindset that I've created. The notion of the egregore is that after a period of focus of the creation of that image of somebody or a nation or a situation, is that starts to take on a life of its own, which is why a few hundred years ago it was actually drawn sometimes as an exaggerated dark figure that surrounded a person or a country even, and overshadowed it. And so you kind of get views about how do you get rid of egregores, and it's very similar to around exorcism and that kind of thing. I've written about them purely in the metaphorical sense for most of my people that read my work, as the exorcism of getting rid of an egregore can be as simple as everybody ignoring it, or having truth sessions where you actually say, well, how truthful is this thought form of a person that we've demonized, and let's address that with truth. Let's put the thing right by actually describing what the real person is rather than the demon that we've made. So you can find it in bullying, you can find it in situations where somebody is going to be hounded out of an organisation, because what happens is enough people, and you get a tipping point, build up an image of that person. And the reason I think we make a mistake if we think it's a thought form, it's not. It's a kind of imagination form that can be built up by the way we think about a person, but to constantly do that requires your will. We have to put some will energy into it. And so it's not only a thought form, it's a process of willing something into being. Literally, that when that person enters a room, if we demonize them enough, everybody doesn't see that person. We have a collective image of that person being a demonic version of themselves. Equally, it can happen when we idealize somebody, and what we see is the superhero and the champion, and that's not the person at all. And because that starts to affect the situation around us, the language that we use, the way we interact with that person, is that person's behavior can actually take on the form of the egregore, and somebody that we demonize as being untrustworthy and unreliable, that person can pick up on it, and if you're on the esoteric side, they don't just pick up on it psychologically, it actually starts to overshadow them. It starts to you could even say possess them, and they become that thing. And then it can become very difficult to separate the truth of a person from the demon of a person. Now, of course, that happened in Nazi Germany, that's happened in ideological states where, on the darker side, we've started to demonize an entire people. And when that starts to happen, you can even get whole collective hallucinations and behavior towards a group or even a community in ways that are very, very dark and damaging. And it can be very hard to undo it. So the notion of egregores, perhaps it doesn't surprise you, this is quite a tempting thing in the world of social media, and things like cyberbullying and trolling is when language gets shared with quite a lot of will force that starts to describe, can start to draw and picture somebody in a form that is an exaggerated version of themselves. But when that exaggerated version is invested in enough people, it can create a tipping point where it would seem that the egregore has actually come into being and is starting to influence the behavior of the individual, the group, even the society that has had an egregore created of it, and that becomes the thing we see and interact with, and not the person or the group. And what can happen is they might try to fight back, but the strength of a group over the strength of an individual, you've almost got a kind of scales which can tip one way or another, and it can be very difficult to hold your own when an egregore has been made of you. So a lot of my work over the years has been what I sometimes call collusion breaking, or even a kind of organisational social exorcism, where in the room I become the kind of Van Helsing character. I have to be careful here, where I simply ask the questions of how true is that? And we look for evidence, and then we find a lot of the so-called evidence that's been built up is exaggerated, it is not even grounded in truth, and the person that's mistrusted and unreliable might be occasionally a bit of a liar, or might be occasionally unreliable, but like a lot of people has a conscience and doesn't mean to, and is not as bad as the egregore that we've created. And so at the moment, I would say in the world of social media and partial reporting in the news and propaganda and agendas is egregores have been created all over the place, of individuals, groups, our partners, society, nations, and so on. And what that creates is the post-truth society, where we start to believe the publicity that we're creating. And as I say, with an egregore, if we create enough collective publicity, it's as if a being comes in place of the real human. And if you're on the esoteric side, that is a spiritual form. It has a gripping and real reality. If you're not into that, we can certainly see that, if we don't call them entities, that certainly we've created collective visions, collective shared images of people, individuals, groups, so on, that behave collectively, socially, with norms and behaviour sets and mindsets as if they really are the egregore. So I'm quite glad that actually my eyes are in shadow here with the sun coming up over Pavilion Gardens Cafe. But egregores, therefore, for me, are something worth looking at. Certainly they've captured the attention of younger people. Certainly they are there in the world of social media and may well start to come into the world of AI, because AI will be very good at creating egregores by its agency, kind of whipping people up into biases and frenzies. So that's egregores. I wonder what you think.